He said, there is no verse of the Quran that was revealed except for I know where it was revealed and what it was revealed about, because my Lord blessed me with an intellect that is deep and ingrained in understanding things, and my tongue is a tongue that is not shy to ask questions. Right? And that's an interesting statement from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. And if you look at the Hanafi madhab and how that developed going back to the fiqh, you see where it all came from. He had that intellectual, logical / asking a lot of questions and thinking and understanding mentality that Abu Hanifa and his teachers, because they learned from Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. Unfortunately today, not much of the Hanafis are doing a lot of discussing and talking about the opinions. Just follow. This is what we do. Don't question it, right? I was talking to a sheikh in England, and I was discussing this point. He said, you're right, man. He was like, but what are we going to do? We were trained in a madrasa, it's called Darul Ulum, and that's my sheikh, and how could I dare question him? And I said, but weren't the Hanafi students questioning Abu Hanifa? Wasn't Abu Hanifa questioning Ibrahim al-Nakhai? Wasn't Ibrahim al-Nakhai questioning Hamad Sulaiman? Wasn't he questioning Abdullah ibn Mas'ud? And so forth. Going back to the statement we just said of Abdullah ibn Mas'ud talking to the Prophet. So why is that ayah? Why is this? Can you explain that? And so forth, right? So that is where we need to go as an ummah. And you'll find that amongst all the madhabs, right? But what my point was that the Hanafi madhab was known in its original to be the most intellectually diverse and capable madhab with using reason in its relationship with dealing with scripture and revelation and its meaning. You would expect that from those that call themselves the madhahib of ma'thur or hadith or literal texts. But the Hanafi madhab was known as madrasat al-ra'i. And that goes back to Abdullah Mas'ud's mentality, asking questions. And so that led him to have a very deep understanding of the Quran. He had a very deep, thorough relationship with the Quran that moved the people to see the beauty of the depth of the Quran. See, some people, they just learn Quran surface or basic, and they go around telling people, well, that's a rule and this is a rule, and they don't know the depth. And so they don't realize that maybe they're not properly representing the Quran, or the hadith, or the statement of the Prophet ﷺ, or the madhab, or the fiqh, or the rulings that came from it. So tafsir is very much a basis for everything. Tafsir is, yes, sister?
Is that what comes into play when you maybe have a conversation with someone and sharing something with them that you were blessed to have knowledge of, and they'll say, well, show me that in the Quran. And it might not be in the Quran because it's deeper than that. The Quran has taken it deeper. And because people are not diving deeper in the Quran to get to the essence of what's been revealed.
Yeah, I definitely see your point. It is something from our character as Muslims, and when we get into certain character quality traits in the future, we'll see that more in focus. But if somebody asks you, if you're a scholar, and somebody asks you, show me that in the Quran, you can explain that to them, but other people would not see that, well, I would not follow it unless he tells me, because he's a scholar. Obviously we know he knows what he is. We don't, when the doctor says, we don't say, okay, explain to me that, because you have no idea in many cases what he's talking about. He's going to get into lingo and scientific terminology and so forth. But it's good to ask a question. It's good to try to know the reference. But if you said something about Islam and they said, well, can you show me that in the Quran, and you can't, as a common person, as a lay person, this is going to be a problem, because we do need to have reference, because there are people who have said this is Islam and they do not have a reference. And but here's going back to, I think, probably what I feel you were saying, is that, say there's a verse, you say, here's the verse, and then they say, but that's not what the verse says, because you really contemplated, or the scholar you learned it from really contemplated and went into the depth, and they're not getting that, because they're just saying, well, at first glance, that's not what that's not the way the Quran is. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنِ. It says that. It says, shouldn't the people deeply contemplate the Quran? Not just read and say, oh, that's what it says, and you said something different, so I will, without even thinking about your analysis or the scholar that explained that to you. Yeah, so we should have reference, though. That's very much important, Because when you say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, in being a believer that there is one God and Muhammad was his messenger, that means anything you're going to ascribe to your faith that you've just announced by those two statements needs to go back to one of the two. So it needs to be an ayah or a hadith for anything that we're teaching, believing, or practicing. So the Quran was definitely amongst the companions very commonly explained by a few people. So you have Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, you have Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Zayd ibn Thabit, Aisha radiyallahu anha. What is the common thread about all of these people who were the most famous commentators? What were they also?
Relatives?
Huh? No, companions, yeah, but we're talking about...
Family members?
No. So, the most famous commentators on the Quran are Abdullah bin Mas'ud, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Aisha, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, Ubay bin Ka'b, Uthman ibn Affan. These are the people, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. These are also the most famous memorizers. The point is that memorization and understanding always went hand in hand. That was always a balance. That was always equally given importance. Because what could come if you don't memorize the verse, and you're like, this is what Islam teaches. And they're like, hold on, where's the verse on that? Well, I don't know, but I know I was deep in it at one point. Hold on, man, I don't know. I left some of those religions where they come up with ideas that aren't found anywhere in the text. You know, I'm sure everybody knows certain major religions that have very big dogmatic principles that if you go in the text, that's not found anywhere. So we should be careful of that. If you just look at the seriousness of it, Anas bin Malik radiyallahu anhu, he said anyone who memorized Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran, it's the second and third chapter of the Quran, which amounts to about a sixth of the Quran. Yeah, it's a lot of this. Maybe it's a fifth or a sixth of the Quran. He said we used to see that person as a respected scholar. Jadda fina, jalla fina, man قرأ وحفظ البقرة والآل عمران. So you got kids in Muslim countries that don't know Arabic, don't know anything about it, and even in Arabic countries that don't understand any of it, that know Baqarah and Al Imran, and they're out doing all kind of stuff in the street when they leave their Quran class, So it's because, once again, the point that really needs to be emphasized and driven home is that there's this mentality across the ummah that the priority is to memorize and recite properly. Yeah, this is something that really needs to be changed if we expect to properly present ourselves. Like, let me tell you, right now, what's the biggest problem with Muslims in the world? Terrorism. Not that that's a prevalent problem, but that's the one the media is focusing on so much to make it look like it's a big deal. Well, I can promise you this. If all of those people that blew themselves up or blew others up understood the proper tafseer of the Quran, that somebody cherry-picked a verse from it and threw it at them, then they would not have done those things. But because somebody took a face value verse that said, see, it says, kill the criminal oppressors, or the martyr who dies goes to heaven. And it does say those things. But the way you're doing that is not the way it is supposed to be done, right? That is a complete misapplication and misunderstanding of the verses. So that is a big problem. So pretty much all of it, we go to the Muslim world and we see all of the problems. Like, I'll give you one famous example. Brother, I think I gave this example in another class, but basically I get in this taxi and the brother's like, oh, mashallah, you're from America and this and that, mashallah, this and that. We went, and at the end of the taxi ride, he was like, it's free. Don't worry about it. It's free. It's on me, brother. It's on the house. I was like, really? And he said, wallahi, I swear to God, it's free taxi cab ride. It's about 5 Junay worth, which for a taxi cab driver, it was a good 4 or 5 miles we went, right? So he was like, it's free. So I get out and I start to walk away. He's like, hey, where you going? And I was like, I'm leaving. He was like, nah, you this and that, America, and he's American, see, all of you are the same, you greedy, this and that and the other. And I was like, what are you talking about, man? And he was like, yeah. He was like, you didn't pay your thing. I said, you said it was free. He's like, you ghabi and this and that, you dumb, this and that and other. So I went to the sheikh the next day. I'm like, sheikh, what the heck happened yesterday? He's like, no, it's our culture. And I was like, what is your culture? Yeah, in our culture, we're all mostly poor around here. So we'd love to be able to give people stuff for free, and so we say that, right? And so I said, but hold on, I said, hold on, Sheikh. The problem is, Sheikh, we just did, because we were at the middle of studying Juz al-Qad Sami'a, right? And in Juz Qad Sami'a, there is كَبْرَ مَقَةً عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. So the very clear verse of the Quran says, it is greatly displeasing to God to say you're going to do something and not do it. This is a clear verse of the Quran.
What surah is that?
This is Surah As-Saf, the third verse of Surah As-Saf. So now we have a disconnect. So he said, no, Yahya, okay, that's the Quran and everything, but we don't mean that. And I was like, brother, you're the Quran teacher here. Now once again, who was this guy? He was a Quran teacher. He has mastered the recitation and everything. He won a world competition in recitation, believe it or not. But now our culture is now defining something that goes against Islamic practice, right? Yeah, so we weren't reading and memorizing that thinking, you know what, we should probably stop telling people. The movement in the country wasn't, we should probably stop this practice that we're doing, where we do like this and that and that. Like as American, when we become Muslim, obviously there are various things, secular and Christian and other things that we have to fix. And they don't let us miss any of that. You need to, yeah, you know what you're doing, this is the way you talk and act and dress and everything, and you need to be like this. So we fixed all of that. We're humbling ourselves. And then you try to turn the table and it's like, oh, you racist, this and that. I can't believe you said that to me. You said about our whole country. I said, no. I'm talking about a concept and how it goes against our religion, and I'm using the verse to correct the concept. I don't care who did it, right? Had nothing to do with American talking about Arabs. That's your interpretation, because you're trying to hide from the fact that you, just like me, are a human that's capable of making mistakes. Right, so this is where we need tafsir to really affect our lives. And it goes, so this is the Sheikh, he put in this book that we're looking at called Muqaddimah fi Usul al-Tafsir. He said, if somebody says, I want to study medicine, or I want to study engineering, or I want to study literature, they're going to give you books. And you're going to, but he's like, if somebody gave you a book, and you're an Arab guy, and they gave you a book in medicine in French, and they're like, yeah, you just read it. And then you're like, he's like, well, first you need to make sure you can read French properly. And then you're going to read it, and you're probably never going to figure out French as a language. But it'll soak into you somehow. Just keep reading that book on medicine in French. Keep reading it a lot. And maybe at some point, the blessings are going to soak up in. Do you know who's saying this? This is Ibn Taymiyyah. Somebody said, oh, that Americanized guy. This is Ibn Taymiyyah saying this stuff a long time ago. This problem isn't new. This was going on 800 years ago when Ibn Taymiyyah was alive, right? So he was trying to deal with it, and we're trying to follow his lead. So he said, of course, with the book of God and how to go to heaven, right, we're going to need to know that. Like if I told you, I always use this with the youth, if I told you, okay, uptown, I've hidden $1 million in a satchel. Here's the instructions, and I give it to you all, and it's in Chinese. Have fun. Figure it out. At some point, if you just stare at it long enough, maybe if you listen to a guy say it real nicely, he'll tell you, he'll be like, and he's telling you, breaking it down for you. I don't know how it sounds. To be fair, I did that one time, and there was a Chinese brother named Saeed. He was like, but you Americans sound like dogs barking all the time. Blah, 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 blah. That's how you sound. So let's be fair, you don't have no nuance to your language. You sound like somebody. So what is the purpose of tafsir? The purpose is to uncover the possible meanings, to clarify the truth of guidance, and to remove doubts and falsehoods that are applied to the Quran. That's the whole purpose. And there are whole books written to try to claim that there is falsehood in the Quran, or that the Quran is about falsehood, or that the Quran is contradictory. Like, I'll give you one example. One guy wrote a book, he said, I found all these contradictions in the Quran, and the Quran says, if you found many contradictions, then it can't be from God. That is a meaning that's found in Surah An-Nisa, right? So he wrote all that. So one of them is talking about the people on the Day of Judgment. فَلَنَسْأَلَنَّهُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ عَمَّا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Which means what? We will ask everybody about what they've done in their lives, right? Surah Al-Rahman. فَيَوْمَئِذٍ لَا يُسْأَلُ عَنْ ذَنْبِهِ إِنسٌ وَلَا جَنٌ. So he said, see, on the Day of Judgment, nobody will be asked from jinns or humans about what they've done in life. on their sins, right? So see, now you have a clear-cut contradiction. So what's interesting about that is he found that from reading the Arabic copy or the translation, but he didn't go. If you go to the tafsir of these ayahs, they goes by like Imam al-Tabari, for example. Imam Ibn Abbas himself has his own. Ibn Abbas said the first one is talking about the asking of why you did what you did, giving you a chance to justify your ignorance or whatever. The second one is saying God knows everything you did, so it doesn't matter. It's not if you did it. He knows you did it. There is no question about if you did it. So the first one is asking why, the second one is asking if. And if you go contextually, you will see the flow, right? But that's not going to come to anybody who's looking to disprove the Quran. That's going to come to somebody that's looking at what's being said in the Quran because they're seeking the contentment of God, which is the qualifying conditional clause in ever understanding any of the tafsir. So it starts out, Hudan lil muttaqeen. It will be guidance for those who are God conscious. Those who are not God conscious will be like, this is boring. No, I don't get it. Let me go read a Harry Potter book. So we did our Quran test earlier this morning. And the young girl, she's innocent. She didn't mean no harm. But she's like 11 years old. And I asked the sister, I said, we didn't come out the way we were looking for it. I was like, what did you do all last week? Well, my uncle came and visited us last night. I said, but you've been knowing about this test coming up for months now, and we said it last week that there's a final test. So then I counted up the hours. This is maybe a shortcoming quality, similar like my father. So I counted up her hours last week. I counted up 24 times 7, and then, cancel out half of that for sleep, half of that for... So I came up with she got like 78 hours. What'd you do with your 78 hours? I told her, I'm probably the only sheikh or imam or whatever in Charlotte that will tell you it's okay to read Harry Potter or to watch the movie. But after you know your deen, and never before, right? I don't see any problem with spending a couple hours or a few hours reading here and there on that. Once you know your deen and you can deal with things and understand things, there's no clear-cut haram nature to that thing. The things that is being... we know it's a fictional story about some kid that's doing that. Now, we all know that, right? But if you don't know Quran and you've learned all that, then your priorities are all messed up, going back to the very beginning about can you spell and should that count against you, right? If you know the whole story of Harry Potter on the Day of Judgment, that's not going to help you out, right? Yeah, so that's the problem. That's the problem. So there are different styles of tafsir. Within the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, you have various people who made tafsir. The most reliable tafsir is someone who's been trained in various disciplines, in various sciences. So we talked about fiqh. Those of you that went to fiqh, we're talking about tafsir. There's hadith sciences, there's aqidah, there's linguistic sciences, there's the study of logic and philosophy. There's all these different things that are involved within scholarship of the Islamic realm. And few scholars, what we call mujtahid, someone who has the capability to issue their own rulings upon Islam, even without an ayah or hadith, because of their deep relationship with its objectives and principled understanding. You have those. So for example, Imam al-Tabari was well known for this. Imam al-Qurtubi, Ibn Kathir, al-Baghawi. These are some of the historical tafsirs that were very much rooted. Imam al-Shawkani's tafsir is very powerful because they have all these disciplines. So they're not gonna. So you have some tafsirs that it's just a guy that's all spiritual. So he's like very spiritual. So he's looking into deep spiritual meanings, but he doesn't know about authentic hadith. So he's giving you a fabricated hadith, right? Anybody heard about the story of the ayat al-shaitan or whatever? You don't know about the story of where Salman Rushdie got his whole book? All we know is Salman Rushdie, his head is off. We're going to get his head because the Iran Ayatollah said so. The fatwa. I met some non-Muslims one time and I said something about a fatwa. He said, fatwa? He got scared of me. I said, what do you mean fatwa? You mean like somebody should be killed? I said, no. Fatwa means a legal ruling, right? Just the one you heard of is Salman Rushdie for writing a book called The Satanic Verses. Well, anyways, there's this chapter of the Quran in Surah An-Najm, and there are fabricated and very weak hadiths that some scholars of tafsir wanted to they found them and they were related to the verse, so they just threw them in there. It explains it. Let's get some meaning out of it. I found these hadiths, let's put them in there. but they don't know anything about the science of hadith and about their authenticity, nor are they versed in aqidah, which is these hadiths go against our belief system, which is founded on comprehensive knowledge of the Quran and the philosophy of understanding the logic therein and belief system. So it says like that supposedly the Prophet ﷺ reading some verses of the Quran in front of all the polytheists, and then he came out and said, and these great noble idols that people are worshipping are so noble and honorable and all of that, right? They're saying that he said this, right? So many people, when they read that tafsir, they're like, why would he be doing that? That doesn't make sense, and this and that. So there's another verse of Surah Hajj where they're explaining that, because it said that Satan goes to all prophets and throws ideas and mixes up what they teach with what he says, and so they're making it a literal that Satan put this in his actual speech to the people. Well, the problem is those hadith are very fabricated and very weak and have no basis there's many breaks in the chain, there are liars in the chain, there's corrupt people in the chain, there's people we don't know in the chain of narration of those hadiths. So that's a problem. And you'll find this in various tafseers. You're going to find somebody throw in a hadith or even an interpretation, which there is an authentic hadith or a statement of a companion to explain it, and they've given their own interpretation which goes against that. So there are various tafseers. And I would say there are thousands of scholars in our history who did complete analysis and commentary of the Holy Quran. There's about 20 or 30 of those that are seen as the most authentic and verified and recognized. And so you have to be careful with reading a tafsir to make sure that you're looking at a disciplined approach with somebody with comprehensive knowledge, because anybody can just start making up their tafsir and say, there's a tafsir, right? How do you know what that is and if it's authentic or not, right? So the Shia have tafsir, the Zaydis have tafsir, these Ibadis have tafsir. You know what an Ibadi is? You don't even know what that is. They got their own tafsir, right? Yeah. So that's an issue. Now, I guess to conclude is when you look at the resources and references of commenting on the Quran, obviously the most authoritative is that you have one verse that gives more definitive understanding of another verse that's vague. So you have one verse that's vague. It says this is the reality. And then this one says, and this will happen and that will happen, and this is detailing that verse. So that's the best tafsir you can possibly get, right? And so one of our great scholars, Muhammad Amin Shanqiti, he did Adwa al-Bayan fi Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. He's a very great scholar from Mauritania who teaches graduate sciences of Usul al-Din in Saudi Arabia. He made a beautiful, we have it here in our Arabic library, of the Quran. It's just all about Quran, talking about Quran. So,
yeah, that's what it says. Quran explains itself.
Yeah, internally. So then the second is obviously an authentic hadith. You have an authentic hadith that it's chain of transmission from hadith scholars. And so if a mufassir is trained in hadith sciences, then they will know what hadith to put in there. So I named to you some of those scholars that are well known for sticking only to the authentic hadith. And then we have a new concept called tahqiq, which we won't go out of our talk here. Basically, where people are fixing, they're fixing old 1,000-year-old tafsirs that have all these spurious narrations in them, and they're removing them, and they're putting that, these narrations are not authentic, and so they should not be found explaining the holy book of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So that's there. So if the hadith is saying this ayah means this, that makes it very easy. And you could easily say there's about 60-70% of the Quran is not directly said, but it could be commented on through very clear relationship of an authentic hadith to an ayah. And as we said, another one would be if the Prophet ﷺ was doing something in his character and manners are reflecting something. And so that fills in the other 30-40% of the Quran. Then you have the companions. They're giving their explanation to kind of detailed things. I'll give you an example. One companion made a narration that the kursi, there's an issue about what does kursi mean in Ayatul Kursi. So some people said it means the throne of God. But then there's a guy, I think it's Ibn Abbas, no, it's Qatada. He came and he said, no, there is a creation that is under the throne that is called Kursi. And it is expanding over the whole universe. But if you look at the narration of that, it's called mawquf, going to this hadith sciences. It doesn't go back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then there are people who will say logically, why would he say something about the unseen world unless he heard it from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So it's understood. Other scholars said no, if it was understood, he should have said that. But obviously he's being careful to say that for a reason, because everybody else is narrates a hadith say the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. See how scholars, they're being careful, they're very professional. Right? We hope our ummah will return to the professionalism that founded our sciences. And so then there's another, Ibn Abbas says, that in another ayah it says, وَسِعَ رَبِّ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ عِلْمًا, that his knowledge surrounds everything. So it says, وَسِعَ كُرْسِيُّهُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So he said it's his knowledge, because if we take that ayah, it explains this ayah, and that's the best way to deal with it. So it's his knowledge that is under the throne and everything therein. Right? So his knowledge, يُحِيطُونَ بِهِ عِلْمًا, right? They don't have circumference or not. He is circumferencing them with knowledge and not them him. How could that be unless the knowledge is everywhere, right? وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, right? He is with you wherever you are by his knowledge. He knows everything about his creation. So that's one example of that. Then you might have a weak hadith. You might have a weak hadith that does fit to explain the verse. If that weak hadith has a weakness in the chain, and it goes along with the teachings and everything that we have, then that's a very strong way to explain. Because a weak hadith does not mean for sure it wasn't said by the Prophet. It means there's a possibility that it was not said by the Prophet Muhammad. When we get into hadith sciences, you will understand. It will blow your mind. To be honest with you, as Rosier said, one of the Orientalists of, I think, France, he said that if Christians had the same earnestness about preserving the life of Jesus as the Muslims did about Muhammad, we would have volumes and volumes instead of just these little Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John with a very limited, with differing stories about the same story from 4 different people, and we can't even connect those people to him directly. So he was making that claim. He's a guy that doesn't believe in Islam, but he's respecting that very meticulous, scrupulous science of hadith. So even a weak hadith is acceptable. So then the next one is you have a ma'thur, you have a companion commenting on the Quran. He's either commenting on something he might have heard from the Prophet, but he's not going to put his soul on the line by saying, I heard the Prophet said, thus making it revelation. Or he's saying it because of a linguistic interpretation that he has. Or he's looking into it from the whole of Islamic sciences and other hadiths he's heard and kind of just making sense of it. So those people who are closest to the Prophet ﷺ, they have a general understanding which is pure and intense more than any one of us. So when the companion is explaining the Quran, that becomes tafsir. And then the tabi'een, their followers, that when they explain it, that becomes... So then the last one is opinion. An opinion is based upon the logic of... this is science called mantiq. We'll get there as well. It's the basis for usul al-fiqh. And it's also the basis for tafsir bil-ra'i, to explain with opinion. Or the linguistic connotation, which is part of that. So if there's a linguistic connotation there's some poetry that explains some word that wasn't explained anywhere else, so then we can help understand the Quran according to that. So that's basically our introduction to the tafsir of the Holy Quran. If we have any questions about tafsir or certain ayahs that you're not sure about what they mean, why tafsir is the way it is, any questions that you may have, we want to make sure that if we leave here, that we leave with a good sound understanding of what we're talking about. Alhamdulillah. Yes, brother.
So you mentioned the satanic verses by the book. So
Yeah.
what is the Muslim perspective on that?
Yeah, so basically the satanic verses really isn't, he didn't mention directly the thing, but he's kind of piggybacking on the claim that Muhammad was a false prophet. I mean, that's basically, it's a fictional book. It's not accounting really from his life, but it's mocking his teachings. That's what it's doing. So Salman Rushdie is obviously an atheist now, right? And that's his right. He's a man that lives in England. So our opinion of Salman Rushdie is he's an atheist living in England. God bless him with guidance again. Otherwise, his soul is in trouble. That's our opinion of Salman Rushdie. The book is a bad book. It's a book that has mockery. How does it? Sheikh, help me out. وأنت ولو رأيت الذين يخوضون في آياتنا فأعرض عنهم. If you come around people that are mocking the verses of God, then turn your back on those people and stay away from them. So our view of the book is it's a filthy book that we wouldn't want to waste our time reading. You know, you have some scholars that busted out with the burn them and find them. Okay, this is illegal because if it's an Islamic state and the government did it, that would be a great opinion, right? But that's not freedom, right? Well, Islamic state is a theocracy. It's just like, you know, people aren't very comfortable about having communist books here in America, and they never were, right? Because it goes against the fabric of the capitalist democracy, secular institution that this is, right? And I'm sure, here's what's interesting, what I've found. I go and I kind of check out all bookstores that I go to, like Books A Million or Barnes & Noble or whatever. It's very interesting. If you go to any Christian or Jewish section, you will find all of these very inspiring, deep, beautiful books on Christianity and Judaism. If you go to Islam, 90% of it is attacking, belittling, vilifying, hating, worse than the satanic verses. Then you ask the guy, are there critical books on Christianity and Judaism? Oh, that's a whole other section, not even in the religions. It's a philosophical criticism angle. So why don't you put this? And I've written an official letter to all the management of them with no avail. The standard we have is it is natural to criticize, ridicule, and vilify Islam. That's normal. Those people blew up 9/11, right? Remember? Yeah. So this is what we got to do with them. Although, so we look at all the evils that have been done by the hands of Christians and Jews in history, but that's fine because we're a Judeo-Christian country. So we separate those. So obviously we have to respect these two religions. And all those that had many disrespectful things to say, their books are put under atheistic or criticisms and so forth. So it's really unfortunate. But yeah, that's kind of like the way we as Muslims should be dealing with those things. The best way to deal with that stuff is an activist approach. Like when people drew pictures of the Prophet or put out videos that malign our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How do you deal with that? You go meet those people. You invite them to some very good food. You have an open discussion. You write pamphlets. You send them to the people. You make DVDs and documentaries. And you said this is the modern jihad. This is the way you fight wars nowadays, in the minds and the hearts of people. You're not going to impress anybody by flipping out on an embassy and blowing up stuff and burning effigies and flags. You're just going to look like a crazy idiot that proves the point of the people who drew the picture in the first place. So unfortunately, that's the way we are currently functioning. Any other questions?
Yes, I have two questions.
Excellent.
In your introduction, the first Quranic verse you went over